I, along with my colleagues Dustin Luke, IGF-USA co-chair, and Ryan Johnston, Senior Policy Counsel for Federal Programs at Next Century Cities, and the rest of the panel team wanted to explore what the future of equity looks like as the internet and its uses continue to evolve. First, it's important to share some recent historical trends. Among families with lower incomes, we see lower rates of adoption and higher rates of exclusive reliance on mobile data plans for internet access. And this reliance adds to their monthly expenses. Disparities.
Recording in progress.
Okay. Disparities in access and adoption are also seen along ethnic and racial lines. Persons with disabilities face challenges using the internet and connected devices, which results in low adoption rates. While these divides continue to persist, those who have access are increasingly more connected, as evidenced by marked increases in the use of smart TVs and IoT wearables. As these trends continue to develop, households demonstrate widespread concerns about cybersecurity and privacy issues. We see divides across all contexts, rural, urban, and tribal. In asking the question, what still needs to change, we mean to have a general acknowledgement that in the current internet, not everyone has been able to participate equitably nor equally in the psychosocial and economic benefits of the internet, not as designers, not as users, businesses, nor as consumers. To explore this critical question today, we brought together experts with diverse experiences and opinions. We want to thank you for being here, and we hope you learn much from attending this panel session. And so without further ado, I turn it over to our moderator, Mr. Dustin Luke.
Thank you so much, Romella, for setting the scene there. And apologies to everyone for being a little bit late. Apparently, we're better doing things virtually than in person these days. So thanks for bearing with us. I am really looking forward to facilitating this conversation today. We have a great slate of speakers that can bring in a local perspective on addressing the gaps that exist in access, adoption, and use of broadband internet services. And we're also bringing in expertise on past and current federal programs, these needs. The digital divide is something that we've been talking about for over 2 decades now, longer than the IGF-USA has existed. Looked back at our first program in 2009, and unfortunately, the description that was written for that session could have applied to this one as well. Over the span of time, there have been programs to address this, but it really took a global pandemic for there to be the widespread acknowledgement of the actual scope of the digital inequities in the U.S. Alongside this growing acknowledgement, the programs that we've seen rolled out are seeming to embrace the role of states, and equally importantly, the local, tribal, and territorial governments that this funding is really ultimately aimed at helping. And so this is important. We're at an inflection point. There is a historic level of investment being made in these programs, with $14.2 billion for the Affordable Connectivity Program, $48 billion in the Internet for All initiative, including $42.5 billion for the BEAD program. In addition to this, there were also funds made available through the American Rescue Plan Act, FCC's RDOF program, USD's Reconnect, as well as others. And Happening parallel to this is a long overdue effort to improve the FCC's data on where broadband is and is not. And while we await the outcomes of these new maps, this demonstrates another area in which local communities have a lot to offer. They know a lot better than anyone where the gaps and local needs are, and are well positioned to use that knowledge to help us at a wider scale understand where the needs are and inform and drive the solutions that we're investing in. So this is an incredible opportunity, but I think we also all need to recognize that this is not the end of the journey, and fully addressing the divide that we have is going to require ongoing investments and efforts, which are going to require local solutions and better data. And so we are going to explore this discussion through that local lens, examining the opportunities and challenges before us, and the disconnects that often occur between large federal programs and local priorities and approaches. We're going to start off by hearing from Sarah Olam from Technology Policy Institute to provide some analysis of broadband policies and programs over the past several decades. She'll provide their conclusions and outstanding questions. From there, we'll hear from Nina Bodenheimer from Fort Collins, Colorado, to provide their perspective and a little bit about their work. From there, we'll hear from Joshua Edmonds from Detroit, and Kimberly McKinley from Utopia Fiber, each providing that local on-the-ground experience. And from there, the conversation could go anywhere. So make sure that you stay with us. And Sarah, I will hand it over to you to kick us off.
Thanks, Justin. And I'm here at IGF as well in person. So I said hello to the folks here, but it's easier to be virtual with everybody on Zoom. So thanks for having me here. The Technology Policy Institute, we do a lot of economics related to broadband, other telecom, wireless, spectrum, media. And we recently put out a document called the TPI Broadband Policy Guidebook in April 2022. This guidebook includes kind of a textbook or a summary of the empirical literature, what we know about everything ranging from availability and access, the FCC's deployment data, to adoption, the American Community Survey subscription data. We also include summaries of the other surveys that are out there. Pew does a survey that looks at adoption and reasons why folks are not adopting broadband. In this report, we also include a large section about subsidy programs, what we have learned and what we know about Universal Service Fund, Lifeline, E-Rate, Connect America Fund, RDOF, how they've been successful or not. We also have a section on the BTOP program from the Recovery Act of 2009. We know a lot about other subsidy programs at the state level and the USDA. So our goal as PhD economists and lawyers at our institute is to know the literature, to know what research has shown, and to advise or write, do research on how things can be improved and how to really narrow that the digital divide. And I think in this community, people know these studies and know the results. So I can just reiterate a little bit of what we know, that the digital divide shows, even though there's access in places, there's a gap between people who adopt it and not, and why don't they? And I think folks also know that the top reasons are relevance, affordability, they don't need it. And then those things can be further sliced and diced by income level, age. And so we see that we can try and start to pinpoint, and then urban and rural reasons for why folks are not adopting the internet. Like Romello mentioned about smartphone dependence, that's actually a really interesting one that surveys have shown that folks have enough on their smartphones. They say their mobile phone is enough bandwidth and commuting power. And that's actually equal these days to affordability as a reason why folks aren't adopting fixed residential lines. Other reasons are equipment costs, other options, and just no reason. So what we want to do is have some kind of objective or an empirical results from studies to help really know the ground truth, or to start to understand better what's happening in order to craft policies or recommend policies that would close that divide. Just one final thought before moving on. Some of the things that we don't know. One study that we're doing and we're working on is just the chicken and egg problem, the adoption and availability causation cycle. So is it, are folks not adopting because there's not enough internet, like there aren't high enough speeds, or are there not high enough speeds in a location because people just don't want it? So it's the supply and demand question. Providers are building broadband where people are and where people want it, but maybe there's also a reverse causation. Maybe people aren't connecting because there's not enough there. So that's one of those like empirical questions that economists, it's actually kind of a hard question to answer properly. Folks can like come up with ideas, but if we want to do it properly with statistics and proper methods, it's actually a little bit complicated. So we're working on that and other questions at TPI, and so happy to hear from. And that's at the, I guess, the national level, looking at numbers that cover the whole state, the whole country. And so it's great to hear from folks who are closer in at the local level what the experience is for digital literacy and uptake.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah, for giving us that rundown. And I think this is exactly why we brought in these great local perspectives here. So Nina, we'll go to you first. Tell us about what's happening in Fort Collins, Colorado, and what you're seeing on the ground, successes, challenges, and especially with respect to what's happening at the federal level and any disconnects that you're experiencing there. The obligatory, you're on mute.
Yeah. Hello, all. Thank you, Dustin. So my name is Nina Bodenhammer, and I am in Fort Collins, Colorado. So the city of Fort Collins adopted a full build out for broadband, municipal owned broadband 2 years ago. And as we approach build out, it's really time to launch and address these questions, right? That I think, Sarah, you really framed beautifully. We have both access, which we consider the physical adoption, and then we have equity or utilization. And what are those barriers, or what are those really groupings? So cultural, skills, and hardware is where we're seeing, our engagement fall out. So as we approach build out, we created a very unique municipal structure. And as we are a municipal owned broadband, we have taken 6% of our broadband, the name is Connection is 6% of that revenue is reserved as a pilot, a payment in lieu of taxes. And for municipalities, it's a common structure when you're in the utility business to even the playing field. And so we have 6% of this revenue that we basically pay ourselves to create an economic parity with other providers. The city of Fort Collins has dedicated that 6% pilot revenue to digital access and equity. So our first hurdle is how do we pay ourselves to reduce the digital disparities? And this is the biggest battle, right? So we have a funding pool. As adoption goes up in our community, so do the funds to subsidize or create programs that increase adoption and expand utilization. So we now have this monthly stream coming in, and what to do with those dollars has fallen to me, and I felt very fortunate. So our first kind of hurdle was to just address access. So we have created an income qualified reduced cost internet program. And we've landed at $19.95, and that is for the 1 gig. So one thing we felt very strongly about is we didn't adjust our program offer for the reduced cost. And I think that's what I hear most from residents is when we're looking at CenturyLink, Comcast, when we're looking at these other packages, a reduced cost also provides reduced service. And we wanted to make sure that we leaned in very heavily. So we took our basic home package, which is $60 a month for 1 gig, no service contract, and we have now just reduced that price. So same service, same quality, no contract for those families that are income qualified. We initially launched this program at a 30% area median income. That was the income qualification. And after 1 year, we've actually learned that that is not enough. So we've adjusted that area median income, that now the qualification is 60% of area median income. So that is what an individual demonstrates and verifies in order to enroll under the access umbrella. We also find cities are quite archaic in how we ask people to prove their income need. It can be that alone is a hurdle. So as I launched this program, I actually have been fortunate enough to partner with Code for America. And Code for America has been building our mobile-friendly or our mobile-first online platform for income verification. So we have this very friendly, welcoming application, an online presence where residents can go. They first check their address to make sure that connection is available into their home. They can enroll, they can verify their income, verify their residency. Everything is all in one beautiful package. And so it's easy, and that's it's easy, it's non-threatening. They can do it in their home on their hours. There's no time tax, right? To show up at a city office and prove that you have an income need. So as we are now opening that door to access, we're also looking at utilization. And not just what those disparities are, but again, what are the barriers? And we know it's much more cultural and it's much more skill-based than it is actually hardware, which is a really interesting engagement takeaway for us. So as we have found, that is kind of a larger challenge for us to be in households. And right now we're really meeting with families, residents, every segmented audience you can think of to help them really shape our program in terms of what does it mean? Is it workplace development? Is it, we've developed a partnership with the school district, which I think is natural for places to go to. But, we find that there's just so many partnership hurdles as well. We've had to really lean in very generously and very supportive to build the programs that we need to really reach our residents. So one I worked on this morning is with our largest employers in our community. We are going to work with them to offer as residents, especially if residents are terminated. We want to offer 6 months of free access to internet, right? We know the sooner you can replace that work, the smaller the income, economic impact is on your family and your household. So again, we want to make sure that people have access. So our program, our equity program, works in tandem with access because we know those go together. I know this team has heard me talk about ACP, and I know that's a question, are we participating? And if we start at the resident experience, the American Connectivity Program and the forerunner, the EBB, is certainly there. It is a very complicated program. And one thing that we have learned is that while residents receive this discount and this voucher for discounted services, there are other providers that make it very difficult for our lowest income residents to break out of those contracts and apply that credit toward another provider. As a municipal broadband, we're later to the game, and we have residents who are established Lifeline customers. Again, breaking those contracts we have found is one of the biggest barriers. It has to be in person. We don't have a local office. So we're really navigating how do we help residents identify what's the best process for them and how do we get them successfully enrolled, whether it's our program, whether it's ACP, how do we again make sure that they're connected? The city of Fort Collins at this time is not participating in ACP. The time and labor of receiving the federal subsidy for those clients is more labor. There's no ROI on for us yet. It costs more to participate in the program while we can serve our residents outside of the program and make sure again that we have them enrolled in our own digital access and equity program. I could talk for hours about kind of our learnings. It's fascinating. I don't think it's anything new. I think though for any provider, you can read and you can read. And Sandra, the research is so incredible. It's a critical place to start. And that's where the city of Fort Collins started with what do we know on national levels? How do we know this is going to impact our residents? And then we launched a full force engagement of being with residents, of having a volunteer engagement force that's familiar with both the programs, the offers, the federal opportunity, and our residents. So we have been engaging while we increase access, and now we're developing the program design for how do we respond to utilization.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Nina, and we'll definitely dig into some of that in a little bit.
Sure.
Josh, we'll head over to you next. Tell us what's happening in Detroit, and what are you working on? What are the challenges you're facing, and what's the outlook?
Well, thanks for the invitation to be here. And I think that the biggest thing we're working on is trying to replicate Fort Collins. My goodness. Really impressive, Nina, honestly, city to city, respect. And so what we're doing in Detroit, a lot of the things that you had shared, Sarah, are definitely materializing right in front of us. Some of those are obviously, again, larger assumptions that are being made, but we can definitely validate to some degree a lot of them as it relates to the prevailing attitude on the ground. So in Detroit, media has done us no favors from pointing to the statistics around Detroit, so people are well aware of them. And I think that when you're working in a context like that, we're very nuanced in the way that we frame what we do. You'll seldom ever hear me, even as we talk in front of community, be referred to anything as low income or whatever. Like, I just do not mention that whatsoever. I still see digital equity partners doing that, and I kind of cringe at it because it's not like people walk around with like low income banners over their heads. And so that is something that we are very, very sensitive to in how we frame. The reason why, we are in the infrastructure conversation as it stands now is because we have had a series of prolonged outages. And last year, we had some storms, and some of these outages were actually, over 2 to 3 months at a time. And so as you begin thinking about that, those weren't just internet outages, those were actually landline too. And so, part of the nuance of the conversation about infrastructure, whether it's there, whether it's not, and how someone would subscribe, it's also related to the infrastructure performance. And I think that that's something that we have seen over and over again as we've gone down this path, that a lot of Detroiters specifically have an issue with our current internet duopoly, and that there's not choice, and it's not by nature affordable. And if you're looking at a city with a poverty rate north of 30%, obviously affordability is a core piece of that equation. Now, this is where there's a bit of a tiering to the discussion. when some people nationally are talking about affordability, they will nationally look at the Affordable Connectivity Program as a solution. And locally, when you bring up affordability, we are not looking at the Affordable Connectivity Program as a solution. We are looking at that as, well, isn't that a nice Band-Aid? All right, but by no means would we do that. I remember the very first time, because people can check out, I believe the Benson Institute wrote a pretty compelling report recently about the Affordable Connectivity Program and the rates. You'll see that Detroit, we are north of 92,000 households enrolled in the Affordable Connectivity Program. We have really taken this thing very seriously. We organized, we built up our own call center, used philanthropy to pay for that. We built up our own outreach, our own messaging. Heck, we even did commercials. We did everything to get as many people aware of that. And I remember the day I walked into the mayor's office and said, "Mayor, we are #1 in the country for signing people up for the Affordable Connectivity Program." And he sat there, he said, "Okay, what, a discount? So what's the actual solution here?" It's like, unless we're expecting the federal government to just discount internet forever, where's the solution? And, I got to say that is part of the conversation we had when the chairwoman, as well as the lieutenant governor, both of our congresswomen, and, a number of people in our local community, we had a roundtable. And at that roundtable, we did bring up the Affordable Connectivity Program, and we did talk about how that is not a long-term solution that we look at with a lot of respect. We appreciate what was done to get there. But I think that where the city is now in the position to look at infrastructure, we are going down the part of a municipally owned but privately operated network. Now, I want to make that distinction very clear, because despite what the hit pieces are saying about what we're doing, it is not one where we want to compete against the private sector. Not at all. We actually want to incentivize greater competition. And so our approach is a municipally owned, privately operated, open access network. We are looking at software to automate some of those functions there. And we're starting in the Hope Village neighborhood. Hope Village is a neighborhood in Detroit on the central west side. It has about north of 5,500 residents. And in that neighborhood, that's where we've seen the lion's share of the outages that in some cases are still persistent to this day, spanning back from last year. And so when we began talking about the narrative around why would someone subscribe to an internet service, that performance piece has now came up. And, a lot of the time, optically, it looks like we have a gripe against, the AT&Ts and Comcasts of the world. That's not the case. Now, there are partners in a number of initiatives. We've worked with them, and quite frankly, they're providing us municipal service. And so it's not like we have a gripe against them. But I do think that the thing that we're seeing very clear is if I have a neighborhood that has a poverty rate north of 70%, then how can the public sector come in and essentially build out what needs to be built? In this case, we're building fiber. And how do we de-risk that investment to then incentivize greater private participation? So that's our thinking there. And, we definitely have done this in a community-oriented way, all the way to the point that we released a 60-question survey recently, leveraging GQR Consulting based in DC to do political phone banking, essentially, on digital equity. And so that 60-question survey got us one very important insight. I mean, a lot of good insights, but one that really stuck out to us, which was that 82% of Detroiters believe that internet is too expensive, and that 82% of Detroiters also believe that the local government has a responsibility to build a public infrastructure. That is what we are now looking at to say, we're not doing this in response to a Comcast or an AT&T or anyone else making us upset. It's not what we're doing. We're doing this in response to our community. And if residents are saying that this is what they want or this is what they deserve, then we, the public sector, have a responsibility of fulfilling that. And so as we look at the federal funding and the state funding that's going to be coming down, hopefully to do some to Detroit, it's not enough to cover everywhere, but it is enough to get things going. We're going to be looking at this for the first time and saying, Detroit does not have an unsolvable issue. Rather, we have a solution that is in place that can actually scale it with the right appropriate level of investment. And so the funding that we have right now that's going to infrastructure, that is coming from our rescue plan dollars. Thankfully, we were able to allocate $41 million to digital equity specifically. And so that's a beautiful thing. But in Detroit, the equity needs are very great. And so 41 million is not enough for the entire issue. Even the collective BEAD allocations, if the formula works out and we get, something, that's still not enough. Digital Equity Act, it's still not enough. But I think that what you're going to hear from us is we're appreciative of the leadership that got us to this point. And the only thing that we might disagree sternly on is the way that people are framing the discussion. And so I'll end this by saying, you know, again, the Affordable Connectivity Program, we're thankful that people were able to navigate those hurdles. Kudos to the FCC for getting that thing out as fast as they did, especially to have a successor of the EBB without a lapse. Very impressive. But again, locally, when you talk about affordability, we're thinking more long-term, and we're thinking of building an infrastructure that does not have to be dependent on government subsidies for everyone to be able to use. We think we can build something that people can use, and without strings, without stipulations, and without them having to prove that they're poor to use it. And so we're appreciative of the opportunity. Thank you, other panelists who are here. I'm already learning a lot thus far, and definitely shout out to Fort Collins too.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Josh, for giving us that perspective. And I think that transitions well into what Kim can tell us from the perspective of Utopia Fiber and what needs to happen to better and empower communities to take the steps that are already underway in Fort Collins and Detroit, even if the solutions look a little different. So Kim, can you tell us, first of all, a little bit about Utopia Fiber, your model, and then what you're hearing from the different communities that you've been working with?
Absolutely. I'm going to combine a little bit what Nina and Joshua said. So I am from Utopia Fiber, and Utopia Fiber is the largest open access network in the country. We started almost 20 years ago. So to think that these cities thought about fiber in 2004 when they incorporated is revolutionary if you're looking at it at this point right now. But we're government owned. We are an interlocal agency in the state of Utah. So all we do is that we put infrastructure in. We own the infrastructure and we enable the private sector to compete on that infrastructure. Right now, on the residential side, we have 16 different providers competing for our residents as businesses. So what that does is lower the cost, ups the service. And if anybody isn't familiar in the telecom space, there are some of the most hated companies in America who are big incumbents right now. And at Utopia Fiber, we have, our net promoter score last year was 64, and our Google reviews are over 4.5. And we don't want to make this political, but Utah is a very red state. And people say this is a blue or this is a red concept. It isn't. This is about a connectivity concept. And when we do a survey every year, we ask the residents, are you glad your city got into this? And last year it was close to 80% said, I am overjoyed that my city got into this business because they believe it's infrastructure. But I will say this, I will say this in a very matter-of-fact way, is we are not going to get rid of the digital redlining or solve this problem with the private sector, because it's going to happen with communities, because there's nobody who's going to build out into an entire city but communities, because they owe it to their residents to provide those services. If you are a private company, it comes down to ROI, where can we make the most money? And it's just business. So communities need to get into this space. And I think we keep talking about this term too of served, underserved, and what that means. And I think we have to stop that conversation, because I think it's like the last 5 or more cities that have joined the Utopia network, which we have 18 Utah cities on the Utopia network who provide fiber to the home, have had 2 major incumbents in them. 2 major incumbents are not delivering to those cities' needs. So they are putting money on the line to provide better connectivity for their residents. And I think that's where the conversation needs to change. It's not about, I get that we have unserved and not served and whatever, underserved and unserved, but we need to broaden the conversation, is that it's across the board of where we're really needing to start this conversation. And I think one of the most important points that I will say when you're talking about these programs is that we're owned by cities. My company is owned by cities. And when we've come out and said we want to do a low income product, the incumbents have come to us and said, we will sue you if you do, because we're not getting the same money. And it's like, so where can we go? Because you're getting legally challenged. So we want to provide these services to these residents, but then you're saying, I'm going to get legally challenged because you're providing preferential treatment to one and not giving it to the others. And it's an interesting battle, and we just have to stop these conversations and realize that we just need to serve these residents. And I would agree with what you said, Nina, and I would agree with it wholeheartedly. Just providing 1 gig at the like a $19.95 price point, because just because you're economically disadvantaged, you do not need to be broadband disadvantaged as you go forward. Because if we are going to lift us everybody out of the systematic poverty and this trend that we are seeing, you have to give them robust connectivity to get there. So I think it's a problem. We're taking a different approach, but it gets very interesting. And I think this is another thing that we need to talk about, is that open access with some of these federal programs, it hasn't necessarily qualified, because you had to be the serving the end use customer. So we had not qualified for those. Under some of the recent programs, we are seeing that change, but it has been a problem in the past for networks that didn't look traditional. So it's an interesting battle, but yeah, no, we're battling it every day, as because right now Utopia passes about close to 150,000 homes. And we are the operational partner for Idaho Falls Fiber and Yellowstone Fiber up here in like near Bozeman, Montana, and Gallatin County that I am right now, because we're just talking about connecting the people who can't get connected.
Thanks,
And
Kim.
that is it, Dustin.
Thanks, Kim. Sarah, I know it's always hard to go first and then kind of have everyone follow and respond to what you said. So before I move into questions and additional lines of conversation that I might have, I'd like to give you an opportunity just to respond or dig deeper into any of those conversations.
Well, one thing that I think we know is that we're going to be seeing $42 billion in BEAD spending coming soon, and so there's just going to be an influx of broadband subsidies that are going to be, I guess, directed towards access, but also adoption. There is like a equity component to BEAD, and then there's build out. I think from the perspective of seeing BTOP in 2009, there was a big broadband subsidy fund around the financial crisis. That was like $7 billion of spending. This time around, we have $42 billion and more. There's ARPA money and there's COVID relief money, and there's other funds. Some estimates go upwards of $100 billion for broadband. What I think is really important is that we track where the money is going and we evaluate whether it's effective, because otherwise, in a few years, we're going to hear the same stories that people are unconnected, and yet the one thing that is happening is a lot of money is being spent. And so I think in light of all these like local concerns, we should be aware that this money is coming, but why isn't it affecting the ground, the actual landscape? And so that's where policymakers and and Congress needs to really craft the program so that we can learn from the spending. We can track it. And I think that's like, it sounds obvious, and yet it seems like an elusive goal to actually be able to like record and study from these programs, subsidy programs. So I'm curious to hear from the other panelists, like what kinds of things we should be learning from on the ground. Like what kinds of studies would you like to see, surveys? Like how do you learn about what's effective in your own local areas? Like what do you know that like other people don't know about, like how to get people to sign up? So I'm curious to hear from your experiences.
Yeah, Sarah, thanks for that. And Josh, I'll go to you first because I saw you unmute, but I also wanted to put this in the context of, as you're answering this, think about the state consultation process that's required through the program. And earlier during the fireside chat with Alan Davidson, kind of asked him what their expectations of the states are in those consultations process. So I would like to flip that and say, as communities, what do you expect from states in that consultation process? And I think that ties into what Sarah was asking about how to make sure that what you know on the ground and the data that you have makes it to the states, makes it to the NTIA, and can be used not only to inform how these programs are implemented, but learning from them to ensure that those gaps that we know are going to be left are that we're better equipped to address them moving forward. So I just wanted to add that little context. And Josh.
Yeah, so I'll do my best because that is like a whole dissertation of an answer we could give. But like at a high level, there are a few things that, you know, we've done based on the framing that we've been operating under. And, you know, the best way I can say this framing is that, like, right now, this is a massive group project. And so I've historically disliked group projects. This moment, I appreciate this moment, but this is still a massive group project and everyone is essentially working on it, whether they want to admit it or not. So whatever gets turned in, we're all accountable for. And so knowing that aspect of it, then it's like we have every desire or even just a responsibility to fight for representation in this discussion. And I think it's meaningful representation. I think once again, you're going to have the national strategy as it points to, hey, the state needs to locally consult. That makes sense. Verbally, those words go together. Locally, when you put that into the local context, I think there's scales of engagement here. Because what would happen if a state, now I'm just going to say I don't think Michigan's going to do this, but let's say there was just a state that wanted to say, well, we talked to one community organization in our big city. Well, there's some consultation there. And again, who's actually, what level is permissible? And so I think that on our end, what we're doing, just to bypass all of that, we're looking for that challenge process. That challenge process, and I think across the board for local communities, that is our moment. Yes, the local consultation to the state, yeah, that's important. But I think as it relates to any type of data, any type of mapping, that is our moment. And so there's a twofold effort that we're doing right now. One, we have an active data RFP that's out on the city, again, using our rescue plan money. We invested $5 million, I think it's $6 million into our data ecosystem, specifically on digital equity. Half of that funding is going to building up our internal data capacity and making a lot more of this digital equity data more publicly available. So that way we're not relying on all the data that we know is problematic. And then on the other side, we're paying for essentially a data broker to be able to collect information at scale off of our community organizing effort. I think that a lot of people, when they say listening to community, they use it in a fuzzy, buzzwordy sense. And our sense, how we're approaching that is literally getting into grassroots, and doing it in a community organized fashion. And so we did sign a contract with 270 Strategies recently. They help us do our community organizing. And at this point, we're looking at changing our entire coalition that we built and getting really focused on the community organizing aspect, and then looking at digital equity as the issue to organize around. And so I think when you get into the community organizing fundamentals, that then illuminates the learning, and then it puts any assumption that we have at scale, whether how valid or invalid, and then it actually directs it directly to community and say, hey, people are saying relevance is an issue. Is that an issue here or is not? Is that not an issue? And if it is an issue, how is relevance being perceived locally versus perceived nationally? And so I think that between the data investments we're making and the community organizing investments we're making, that then emboldens us as we look at either a state consultation process or a challenge process, that we have the infrastructure to be effective in any direction that this money decides to go.
Yeah, Josh, thanks for raising the BEAD challenge process. A lot of attention is obviously focused on the FCC challenge process, which is still important, but those state challenge processes are critical to what Sarah was asking as well, with as long as we ensure that they are transparent and that the data coming out of those can be used effectively, and that there's accountability in there built into the process. Kim or Nina, did you want to jump into that question?
I'll go. So, I mean, it's a combination, Dustin, right? Like, so I'm answering your question, Sarah, but one of the real studies that I want to see come out of understanding what people need for connectivity. We keep talking about this 25/3, this 100, and now we're moving up to 100 over 20. Congratulations, we might get there. But what I'm seeing in Utah and other places, and we're seeing more than half of our new customers signing up for a gig, symmetrical. So is it really the conversation? Are we backwards and we need to move this conversation up of what consumers want? Because this is like the only market that the consumers are not driving what the speed is, right? Unless they have the access to it. Because most people only can get what their ISP is offering, not necessarily what they want. So what are the studies of what people want in this? And if they had unlimited capacity, what would they use it for? Because when COVID hit for Team Utopia, our phones went off the hook of people switching from 250 meg to 1 gig. And I always thought, like, did they need it? Or is this like I'm just running because I need more? And what that looks like. And is this a conversation that I think we just need to change the conversation of how we're saying it, of dictating what this speed is, and like let the consumers almost dictate what the speed should be.
Kimberly, I love that, because what I find as I'm out talking with residents, they're very unaware of even what, like, let's say one of the commercial providers, what their reduced package is. They often can't articulate what they're missing out on.
Mm-hmm.
And so to define what I would do in this additional bandwidth is just so foreign. So I do think that utilization matters, and I would love to see research about these benchmarks in utilization. So, I mean, we can read research and we know that household utilization changes, right? Workforce development, interface with health records, these things change as you come off your phone into your home. But what I don't know is, again, those layers within the home. What happens when I have 250 versus 1 gig? And I think that would be fascinating. And I think that we really don't understand price point either. And that's a business that, that I've inherited in this. But again, it is an unusual space because consumers aren't driving price point. You have $9.95 Comcast Essentials, and then what? So trying to land on what is a valid price to pay, and not necessarily for revenue recovery or for profit, but again, what is a viable price to also to add enough investment in that household discretionary income that it is prized. And that's, because I have some communities where we've offered completely free internet access, and the take rate wasn't influenced that much by offering it the $19.95. So there's something in that. What am I purchasing? What am I getting? And what am I willing to pay for it that we don't understand? And we don't understand it because historically it's been a market has been very protected by large commercial providers who were subsidized by the FCC, right? So we're trying to break not just a service kind of institution, but a very private, a very cloistered kind of knowledge as well in terms of utilization and access.
One thing that I would love to see, I don't know how realistic it is, but to attach the federal money with reporting requirements. So while, I mean, it's unrealistic to compel pricing data from like everybody, I think if an ISP accepts subsidy money, it'd be great to know how many subscribers come out of that. We need to know those outcomes, and there are ways that the FCC is tracking the ACP and EBB signups, and so there is some level of anonymity at the zip code level, zip code 3, zip code 5. But scholars like myself I would really like to know the demographics, the income levels, the population density, like of who is uptaking, who is subscribing, and at what speeds, and at what price point. So I think that's one area where public money attaches a, kind of a data gathering privilege, I think, but that require, I don't know if that much scrutiny will be allowed on subsidy grantees. Like, I think, just a grantee doesn't want to share their performance. The money wants to be spent, but do people want to track if it's being used well, or if subscribers are actually signing up for the network? But that would be really important to know, I think.
Sarah, the one other piece that I would mention, because I do know that, like, as we talked about, I think, Dustin, when you're talking about the overview of like Internet 3.0, like, one thing that is that's not coming up enough is, as we look at like the diversified use of, like, for example, fiber optics beyond residential internet access. And so I think that what ends up happening if cities are going down this pathway of looking at fiber, what people are always pushing back on us on are obviously the concerns of overbuilding, or someone saying, well, here you are cannibalizing private competition. But it's like, what doesn't happen is like the actual diversified use cases well beyond. So in Detroit right now, we're having conversations about rebranding the Motor City to be the Mobility City, and the presence of fiber, how that drives that. We've also had the conversation with our healthcare institutions of how remote patient monitoring becomes a real reality now if we do it this way. And so I think that part of the national and broader discussion that we would like to see change and the public discourse change is like, yes, we hear you that you don't like us going after internet access and providing another solution here. But what say you to all the other use cases that we have not unlocked yet that would allow us to really get well beyond this discussion? I think that's where we're trying to get in Detroit now, is like having that more diversified conversation beyond internet access from a residential standpoint.
And I just want to put it this way. And I think this is, when we say overbuilding, it's such a term that I hate that is being used around this country. When in the United States of America has competition ever been a bad thing, except in the broadband world? And like, we like competition in every other space, but in the broadband world, we're like, nope, it's a monopoly or a duopoly system. And I think that's where the thinking has to change, because we need to look at our consumers and their experience more than we look at them protecting monopolies.
Mm-hmm. And then I think the tide is turning, right? So here in Fort Collins, as we move toward, a broadband fiber network, our residents embraced it fully because of both that competition and I think, Josh, you said it earlier, we represent every resident, right? We are not, so as a city that has caught on, we have new build environments and they have beautiful access through commercial providers, but it is our core city or our MDUs, our our apartment buildings that were built before 2000. Their service is pretty weak. So fiber, saying we're going to get fiber to your door, is a really different kind of public proposal, and that we have found people embraced and said, bring it on. Again, I shared with you that we did tax ourselves with a pilot to somewhat diffuse that kind of argument that we're going to undercut commercial providers. But we're finding that the marketplace is certainly, we welcome the marketplace, bring it on, so to speak. Let's see how we deliver and what is the competition at that point.
I have to say, thank you. You all are awesome. I almost don't even have to jump in as a moderator, and this conversation just flows, and you all stay on track and stay within a reasonable time. So this is awesome. But I want to dig in a little bit to what Josh was alluding to with this kind of hook that we used in the title here of Internet Equity 3.0, and thinking about what's next. And really, I want to tie this in with a question that came in through the chat from Lai Olson of Measurement Lab, which is kind of getting to how do we know when the digital divide has come closer to closing. I kind of think of this in the context, Kim, not to push back too hard on you here. This is something you probably hear from Chris a lot, but the term consumer here is kind of shortchanging of everything that the internet can offer. So as we think about the vision here, where we want to get to when the digital divide's closed or closer to being closed, what does that look like for these communities in terms of the real life outcomes? We often have these conversations and we get so caught in the weeds of like the broadband and the connectivity and fail to talk about the actual outcomes, the healthcare, the education, the economic outcomes. So would love to hear from you all as we move into our final 15 minutes of this session to talk about that aspect of these programs and where we need to.
All right.
Who's jumping in? Because I have an answer.
Go ahead, Joshua. Go ahead. I was going to go first. Go.
So the you know, not to get too philosophical, but how we frame this, I can't frame this in front of the mayor because then he's gonna be like, oh, you're losing me. What are you saying? But when we talk about the digital divide, it's a paradigm. And whenever people talk about bridging the digital divide, my response usually is, well, which one? And so I think that as we begin thinking of this, it is a larger cycle, usually, especially in the urban context, exacerbated by poverty, but there's probably leadership poverty across this country on digital inequity. So it depends on what poverty we're talking about as well. But as we begin thinking about this, we do have to ask ourselves, to your point, are we winning? And when do you see the tides turning? And so measuring that over time, yeah, I think out the gate, it's going to be tying a lot of our investments to legitimate outcomes, whether that's all the way down to household percentages, census tract percentages, whatever. We can do a percentage-based look at that. But I think more than anything, I think it's going to manifest in like public discourse and sentiment. That's when you're going to know there's a shift. Right now, it's shifting because the fact that even on this call alone, you literally have legitimately 3 different types of fiber optic expansion strategies. That's incredible. That's already turning. And we're coming from very different places. I don't need to compare Detroit and a city in Utah for people to know that. And so at this point, yeah, it is turning. And I think that the way that we're going to measure this first tranche is really on that 3-legged stool approach. That's where a lot of these investments are going to go anyway. We're going to look at how internet has changed over time. We're going to look at how many people have got devices. We're going to look at how many people have some form of digital literacy. We're going to figure out a way to measure that. What we've done in Detroit is we built out a household index. It's called our digital divide index, so nothing fancy there. But we looked at now saying fully digitally included households. That's what we're counting. And so as we look at fully digitally included households, over time, we're then going to be saying, well, then they're fully digitally included, but are they fully digitally empowered? And then we're going to keep going down this list because, again, this is something that is cyclical in nature and it's going to run in perpetuity. There will always be some type of digital divide. So we need to have some type of infrastructure in place. What we need to get out of, though, is the discourse currently right now that the minute a municipality raises their hand or anyone else who raises their hand who isn't a big, massive corporation internet provider, that somehow we're in the wrong. And I think that's the piece that we're getting out of now. But I think more than anything, the discourse is really going to dictate our actual progress more than anything at this point.
Joshua, I think you were absolutely right on. I mean, it's funny. It is changing, right? I've worked for Utopia Fiber for 11 years. And 11 years ago, I could tell you that if I wore anything that had a Utopia Fiber on it, everybody would yell at me and say, why is the public sector in this space? And now I don't like to wear Utopia Fiber stuff because then they're like, when are you coming to Smith Street? And you're like, I don't carry everybody's address in my head, but thank you for asking. And then when you go to city council meetings, I used to go, and if there was a big crowd, I would be like, oh no, here we go. They're just going to hate on us for a good hour. And now you're seeing them come up and these citizens saying, stop accepting the lies of what has been told to us year after year, and their promises haven't been delivered on. And that goes into this, well, these, like when citizens are standing up and yelling to their city council people, I think that's a huge accomplishment that we're seeing. I talk to cities every day and I say, why are we sitting in front of you? And they said, because we're sick of and tired of hearing of our residents come to us and say that we need better internet. So I think that is absolutely changing. When do we think we have a victory? I think it's a little bit of access and affordability throughout the entire city, and it's affordable internet and they have access to it. Whether they choose to use it and they have the devices, I think is still part of the three-legged stool. But I think those two are the crux of really moving this initiative forward. And I think it's one of the last things that I will say is I think one of the important things is that Detroit and Utah totally look different. I'm not going to say, Joshua, you're a little bit, you're not wrong on that. But we need to put local control on some of this money that's coming out and not do it these federal mandates because they look different, their needs are different, and that we need to give access to the city leaders who are living in these and breathing these communities every single day.
Dustin, I'm going to answer that in a very simplistic, very personal anecdote. And that is, as you know, as we shut schools here in Fort Collins due to COVID, and if I'm in a mobile home community and I'm seeing children have to come out with a laptop or a phone to a mobile wireless unit to download because they don't have any access in their home, that's unacceptable to me. And so to me, we'll win when it is that access, right? Now, again, whether people choose to use it is another step, another, kind of battlefront here. But in this day and age, that's unacceptable to me, that we have children that don't have the options, the access, the opportunity in their own home, and they're depending on a mobile, a mobile unit that arrives at a certain time during the day to deliver a wireless connection. It's unacceptable. So win to me is when, every one of those yummy little students in their home can do what they need to fully function, in the education environment.
All right. Sarah, did you want to jump in on that at all? Okay. So I want to see, and let's prepare for some feedback here. Are there any questions that we have in the room? Is that microphone working? All right. So with that, we have just about 7 minutes left. So want to take this opportunity here to ask each of you. Oh, a little feedback there. Do we have a question from the room?
Justin, can you hear us?
Yeah, it's quite a bit of feedback though. Well, I'd say go ahead and mute over there if you can. All right. Are we safe to talk?
Doesn't, could they just type it?
Can y'all hear?
Yeah, they got to type it.
Yeah, y'all. Can you go ahead and mute over there? I thought it was worth a shot, but so with that, let's go ahead and just move into a closing round here with our last 5 minutes. And this question is coming from Ryan Johnston, who helped organize this session. Is with Next Century Cities. And I think it's a great way to end this and take this opportunity to summarize everything that we've talked about and let us is the advice that you want the federal policymakers structuring these programs to better suit the needs on the ground?
I'll go first on this one. Joshua, I'll let you think for a second on this one. But I think it goes back to what I just said. I think it's giving more control to local governments. And it's not just states, because there's still politicking that's happening at states. I think that it goes down to giving city leaders more choices of what they think unserved, underserved, and what their broadband needs are in their community. And every community in this country is different, and they should not all be treated the same. So how do we really look at this situation in a different way? And I agree, stop throwing money at the same old things and nothing changes. And letting them, removing barriers to municipal broadband in some areas, letting people choose cities choose what option is best for them. Maybe it's a private sector, big telco. Maybe it's a public network, but don't dictate what they can and cannot do in those specific communities. So that is my bit of advice to the federal lawmakers.
Yeah, no, I'll give you the hammer. Just bring us home strong. Or Sarah, one of you two. But you know, on our end, I think it's supporting local governments with whatever decision we make. So, and that support isn't just you know, you show up for a roundtable, or you highlight our initiative on your website. I mean, those are great, but legitimately publicly supporting what we're doing. I cannot stress enough the amount of political risk, at least from a perception standpoint, that we have, where this literally looks like a mountain of a task just for us to do a pilot. And so it feels like we don't have any support. It feels like people who are at these highest levels will say these things in theory and say, well, we want, you know, to connect everybody. But the messy middle is really when it comes down to the political nature of how we've looked at internet access in this country and made it a very political thing. So if anyone wants to do anything in this space, it automatically doesn't go from what's right or wrong. It goes with what's politically sound. And quite frankly, when you're pushing back against these larger incumbents, it is a political fight that a lot of these local communities are not equipped to take on. And quite frankly, with the silence of the nuanced silence, I should say, that when a local community does go down this pathway that you feel, it doesn't really feel like the federal government is really strongly supporting local communities as much as the talking point suggests. And so I would just challenge and just ask, as you see us doing these things on the ground, protect us, help us support whatever decision that we're making in a way that if we are making something that is in line with what this legislation has suggested, which a lot of this stuff is, then help us actually fight back on the ground, because right now that is not happening. There are a lot of people who want to get in this space, especially other cities, but have no clue and no help of being able to push back against these larger monopoly powers.
Hear, hear. And I would echo, I think the theme is the same, right? That the federal support thus far, it has been a square peg in a round hole for a municipal provider. So there is an absence of diversity in models, in service needs, in partnerships. So you have a federal government, and this team has heard me say this, that if you're just expanding a system, which was Lifeline, that the FCC launched 30 years ago to address rural telephone connectivity, they're applying some of the same process and assumptions, and the game has changed. So it's a square peg in a round hole for municipality. To be an alternative provider, there's not a lot of that federal support, easy pathways, or financial avenues, because if the municipal provider is out of the box, and so I'm assuming Kimberly Utopia would have to be outside of the box. So they're still really creating policy and programs that fit a very narrow definition and favors the large commercial providers that have been in the game for a long time. And that game is over. And so I'd like to see federal policy follow the lead of municipalities, providers who are on the community level and driving change upward. Just don't make it so hard.
Yeah, and I would just like to say this. The two of our chairmen, we actually have two boards at Utopia Fiber, and some of those people have been city managers for almost 20 years. And you just hear them say that were criticized, and their whole 30 years as a city manager, they thought was going to go down the tubes about this one topic. And now they are being justified and validated for what they did 20 years ago, but have sat there and been criticized for 20 years for the right decision. And it's like, I couldn't even imagine being in their position and getting criticized every day in and day out for a decision that was right for their community because people weren't supporting them.
Awesome. Well, thank you. You all have been the best panel. I barely had to be here, so I appreciate that. And Sarah, as our resident scholar, would like to ask you to do the scholarly thing for us and suggest where you would like to see this discussion and research go from here, from your perspective, better inform the research that you're working on.
Yeah, thanks, Dustin. Well, I just want more data. So the one thing I would ask is that when the $42 billion goes out the door, that we track it, that the American taxpayer knows, how effective it was. And so that's going to require all the different parties to be willing to share their results, good and bad outcomes. So did the program that you tried to launch not do well? But why? Why not? So that when it happens again, we'll know better. I think there is just a tendency for government programs to always need to sound like they're successful. And so grantees are reluctant to share results that maybe things didn't go as planned. Maybe they built a network and no one subscribed. But we need to know why, and we need to know which projects where that happened. And maybe it's because using that knowledge, we can design future programs better. Maybe there were misallocations to the wrong parts of a state, but we need to know, and we need to have that data coming back. So I think, that would be the researcher's dream. I've done a lot of manual data collection, but it would be nice if NTIA could collect that in a standard manner from all the states. And then the states need to collect that data from their grantees. I think it's kind of something that policymakers think will happen after the money is spent, but that kind of thinking really has to happen on the front end. They need to tell the grantees what's expected of them, and then they need to be ready to fill out those forms and report back. We were granted X million dollars and we signed up X number of households over 5 years or whatever. And so I think that kind of data gathering would be really important. And, the private sector and local, every group tracks their data, but it's hard to collect it across states and across cities to have things to learn from. So I would encourage more data reporting.
Awesome, thank you. So listen to local communities and get more data. You all heard it here. Romelli, you want to send us out? You're on mute.
If we can get unmuted. I just want to thank everyone for a very vibrant discussion today and for great moderation. Equity continues to be a very big concern in the internet space, and we are all doing our part to try to make strides. So thank you all for joining.
Thank you all. Thank you, Romella, for helping to organize this session.
Adios.
Thank you.